It was not lost on those of us who worked on the project that we were asking quite a bit from taxpayers to support a school building project, which, for most residents in both towns, would not serve their own children. For some citizens, it was because their children attended other schools, but for most of the residents of Acton and Boxborough, it was because they did not have any children who attended our schools. Over the last few months, I've had many opportunities to speak with a broad range of people from both communities. What was most humbling was the extraordinary sense of an intergenerational commitment from people to educate our youth with the highest quality programs and educational facilities. So to all of the residents of both towns, I would like to extend my sincere thanks for supporting our schools and, most importantly, our students. I also want to thank the countless staff, volunteers, and especially members of our school building committee who have worked on this project for nearly 5 years. These individuals have spent countless hours working to make this project not only a great school for our students, but also a great value and asset for our community. At the end of this project, there will be clear winners, and these are our students. For those students who attend the new Douglas Gate School when it opens in 2022, they will finally have access to a modern, educationally appropriate facility that supports a true 21st century education. For those students who attend all of our other schools, they will benefit too, because we will be able to continue to improve their schools as well. This project and the votes to approve it marked an important step forward for our schools, our communities, and most importantly, our students. So on behalf of all of the staff and students of the AP schools, a sincere thank you. I hope you have a wonderful break and a Happy New Year.
All right, well first we have Deb Book is here tonight to talk about the most recent MCAS results for our district and to highlight some of the changes made by the state.
So good evening. So I'm going to start with just a quick overview. There we go. The purposes and types of assessment. So you've seen this slide before, but I think it's important for contextualizing, analyzing the reports. We know there are different kinds of purposes of assessments, some for diagnostic and instructional purposes, and some for accountability and system monitoring. And CAS is clearly for accountability and system monitoring. But I will be talking a little bit later about the kinds of instructional assessments. So first with accountability, I included in your slides the new accountability program that the state created last year for your reference. I'm not going to go through all of those slides. I'm only going to highlight 2 slides tonight as they've changed from last year. So the first is that on this slide for accountability for the districts, there were only 2 categories in the left side, so districts without required assistance or intervention. Last year, they only had 2 categories, either meeting or partially meeting. And you can see that the department has expanded that to include 4 different sections now, from all the way from meeting and exceeding targets to limited or no progress towards targets. Our district was on the left side without required assistance or intervention, and the meeting or exceeding target column. Similarly, they did that for the schools. So again, 4 different categories within schools without required assistance or intervention. They always still had the schools of recognition. And this year, Gates Elementary School was a school of recognition. 6 of our schools were in the meeting or exceeding targets column. 2 of our schools are in substantial progress towards the target column. So this accountability slide shares with you the criterion reference component, which is the progress towards meeting the improvement targets, as well as the accountability percentile, which is the normative component. So this view, being it down, you can see schools that are meeting or exceeding targets, and the 2 schools that are substantial progress towards those goals, as well as the normative component, which is how schools are compared across the state. So last year, McCarthy Town was at 61%, and this year we're at 73%, so they made quite a bit of growth, an increase of 12%. Of course, the percents are weighted, 60% for 2019 and 40% for 2018. So this is what's considered the cumulative criterion reference percentage. So again, there's ended up at 61%. 68% this year. Gates increased 9% from 91% to 100%, so an increase of 9%. The junior high from 76% to 81%, an increase of 5%, so those were the greatest changes. But we also had Douglas was at 75% last year and decreased to 40%, so it was a decrease of 35%. So we have a written detailed plan from the principal to address the achievement in English language arts, in math, in science, technology, and engineering, and he will be sharing progress and monitoring that progress throughout the year with us. All right, so moving on to the district guidelines. You've seen this slide before. The fact that we use MCAS data in concert with all the ways of knowing students, and again, I'll talk a little bit more later about the different other kinds of assessments. So we'll start with high school, grade 10. One of the charts that's on your table is going to help explain sort of the equipercentile and what the state is doing for the next couple of years for the passing standard for grade 10, which is a competency determination measure for graduation. Last year, 2018, was the last year for the legacy 10th grade MCAS for math and ELA. In 2019, the students took the next generation MCAS digitally for math and English language arts. So that was the first year for the next gen testing for grade 10. Now, the state tells us we're not supposed to compare the two different versions, but because it's a high school graduation determination, I thought it might be important for you just to see side by side how our students did. This is called an equipercentile. DESI created what they're calling interim passing standards for the classes of 2021 and 2022. So that's this year's 11th graders and this year's 10th graders. In English language arts, you can see the arrow on the left bar column in ELA, the number is 472, and for math, the passing standard is 486. So what that means is that we have some students who were in partially meeting expectations who did meet the passing standard. And in fact, the 10% of our ELA students, you can see in the partially meeting column of 2019, there were 48 students in partially meeting expectations, 47 of those met the passing standard. So even though students didn't meet expectations, they still met the passing standard for graduation. The same is true for mathematics. 7% of our students were partially meeting. Out of 34 students, 20 of those students passed the standard. So they're going to hold this steady for 2 years, and then they're going to determine what the final passing standard will be. We don't know what it's going to be yet, but they're using this for the next couple of years as we transition and districts transition to the test. For the science, technology, and engineering test, this was the last year for that overlap between the old standards and the new standards at grade 10, and our students did just fine. 98% of our students reached achieving proficiency and grades. So English language arts for grades 3 through 8. There was some aggregate improvement in each grade. In fact, for grade 3, there was a 22% increase from 2017 to 2019 for the percentage of students meeting their expectations in English language arts, except for grades 5 and 6. However, we're also looking at the mean growth that remained on or above target. Last year, grade 7 was a concern, but we did some initial work in writing with some prompt writing and aligning with our rubrics more closely to the MCAS scoring guide. So the growth for 7 and 8 continues to improve, but it's just below DESI's target. In grade 8, of course, we see that by just 9/10 of a point to be on target for 59. We can also now begin to look at, because we have 3 years of data, at how aggregate cohorts are performing. So the class of 2023 are our current 9th graders, so they took the 8th grade test last year. So taking a look at how the cohorts are performing over the years, we will certainly be keeping our eye on our current 8th graders and our current 6th graders as they continue on into next year. In 2017 to 2018, for the class of 2023, I took a look at how the state did as well. And for those 2 years in those grades, there was also a dip in the performance. So we decreased by about 11.5%. The state did as well, about 8%. So that was an overall. Just keeping an eye on that because they still did much better this year. On to mathematics. There was relatively no change in grades 5, 7, and 8, or there was improvement, grades 3 and 4 in the cohort percentages for meeting or exceeding expectations from 2018, except for grade 6. However, the growth for all grades are on target, and for grade 6 it was actually above target. The night analysis for the district aggregate revealed that fractions continues to devil us and is an area of focus. Specifically, grade 3 fractions on the number line, and in grade 5, decimals and fractions. In grade 6, 4 of the questions our students didn't do well on was in probability and statistics. It happens to be the last unit for most of the programs that were used in 2018. Our educators are piloting a brand new math program called Illustrative Math. We'll hear a little bit more about that in a minute. And so our hope is that with the new math program in a different order and the way students are learning it, we'll be able to reverse that trend. So again, a look at the cohorts in mathematics. So the class of 2023, again, are our current 9th graders, and you can see there's been improvement in 5 cohorts. Again, an eye on our 8th graders for math as they progress through, which is a little off from last year. All right, on to science, technology, and engineering. Again, Desi makes it clear for us not to make comparisons. This year for science and technology and engineering, it was computer-based, it was all the new format, and it was all the new standards, so a big change from the last couple of years. This 2019 test was the first time only the 2016 standards and practices were assessed. There was a new test design. It included question types such as selected response, constructed response, and modules, which is a cluster of different questions. The question types also based on one phenomenon. And again, students took it on the computer for the first time, so lots of different things there. The biggest shifts for us were in grade 4 content, in physical science and earth science. Grade 5 tests assessed standards from grades 3, grades 4, and grade 5, so there's an even sort of split across all 3 of the grades. Questions on which our students performed not as well were topics that were actually taught in grades 3 and 4. So we know that most of the support is needed in grade 4. This 2019 grade 5 cohort 2 did not have the experience of one of our new focuses on energy investigation, as was introduced in grade 4 in 2018-19. You might recall that our transition plan over the years, the last 5 years, there were going to be some places where there were some gaps. That was one of the last gaps. So going forward, the entire transition is now in place, so there won't be any of those places where there are gaps. However, applying science and engineering understandings across several of the domains requires some more practices, as evidenced by our performance on the module-style questions and performance on the evidence, reasoning, and modeling practice standards. We can also take a look to see in grade 5 how our students did. 35% of our students were proficient with high needs, and 40% of our students with high needs met or exceeded expectations. 25% of our students had high needs in grade 8, and 50% of those students with high needs met or exceeded expectations. And you might recall some of the STEAM work, how we're really trying to ensure that all students participate in science and have experiences, and they're not missing those experiences in class. And I think that reflects some of our concerns. Going on to the lowest quartile data. So just something to point out before we go forward. There will always be a lowest quartile. And so the state will always identify the lowest 25% of students. And so for us, what that really means is how can we move the parameter around that lowest quartile higher towards proficient. So I'll give you an example. For grades 3 through 8, 10% of our students in the lowest quartile actually met expectations. So just because they're in the lowest quartile doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't meet expectations. The goal is to just move that bar higher as the years go on. So the lowest quartile data encompasses students in grades 4 through 8 for mathematics and ELA who've been in the same school for at least 2 years. And since this is the first time that 3rd graders take MCAS, there's no comparison data, so 3rd graders are not included in the lowest quartile data. Student characteristics that include race, socioeconomic status, disability, ethnicity, or any other part of their identity should not be an indicator of access or outcomes. So John put these slides together to make the data visual for us, and I'm only going to focus on a couple of these slides that we thought were important for you to pay attention to. In 2019, Our lowest quartile data shows our students who are economically disadvantaged appear in the lowest quartile at a rate that is twice that of the rate within our general population. So that is a concern for us. As well as the fact that half of our students with IEPs appear in the lowest quartile at 2.8 times the rate for students with IEPs in grades 4 through 8. So those two areas within those demographics that I mentioned earlier are ones for us to pay attention to. We can also disaggregate our growth data by subgroup. And again, I'm not going to go through every slide, just a couple of them for you. So if we take a look at ELA for grades 3 through 8, if we disaggregate the data by student disabilities and English learner standard, I call your attention to the light green area. 1/3 of our multilingual students experience low growth. On the right-hand side there, with the English learner, you see 33%. And a disproportionate percentage experience very high growth, so at 5% as compared with non-ELA population at 21%. We found that to be a bit off. As well as we disaggregate by race and economic status. We're looking at the left column, our growth distribution in ELA for African American and Black, and our multi-race subgroups, narrows and the rest of our subgroups. So we're looking again at the high end, very high end, and we're looking at the very low end. We're looking to see some disproportionality. Okay, moving forward, what are some of the things that we are working on? In general, you've heard us talk about our DCAP. A couple of years ago, we wrote our DCAP based on the UDL fundamental principles. This year, we're adding to the DCAP all the effective instructional practices for students who are learning bilinguals. We're putting asterisks next to those so that we're not extra documents for our educators. And we're also adding some in as well, thanks to our UDL department. All of our educators in grades K through 6 participated in the UDL workshop facilitated by CAST. These workshops were also offered on Professional Learning Day. In the spring, grades 7 and 8 will be introduced to UDL principles, and the workshop we're working on for grades 7 through 12 for next year for all of our educators. That way, the entire district will have an understanding of the UDL principles and will be able to speak the same language. John and I continue to facilitate a workshop on inclusive practices. We'll be sharing with all grade levels. We'll be sharing with our district leadership team, we plan to go to the development department, et cetera, to share the work around inclusive practices. In January and February, a 3-day workshop for our building leaders and teams of educators, a total of about 37 people, plus some outside folks will be participating in a co-teaching workshop. Our seed courses continue to be offered each semester. We have neuroscience presentations. Dr. Christy Blue came to kindergarten grade level meeting. She's coming back to first grade. Our special educators, psychologists, reading specialists all participated in those presentations. We also have a BC professor, Dr. Jessica Black, who's going to be facilitating 2 workshops on developing brain and trauma and neuroscience and social and emotional learning. Again, so our educators need to understand better the science and what research is showing about learning. And DLT this year has been focused on educator evaluations with a special focus on Standard 2, which is teaching all students. At the district and school levels for English language arts, you've heard us talk a little bit about the literacy visioning, including building on a pre-K and TSS framework for reading. Just this past week, the Associate Commissioner, Russell Johnston, put out that DESE will be providing some guidelines for implementation for the new legislation in January, a draft for feedback, and hopefully by the spring, in the summer, they'll have a final version for us that'll include different kinds of research-based and effective practices, assessment tools, as well as resources that teachers can use. So the work that we're doing, at least we'll have the draft in January, and we can be working alongside that, and I have some guidance coming from the department on how to move forward. At the junior high, we're continuing to look at student samples and doing some consistent work, some calibration of their own student writing. The high school, too, is focusing on synthesis and literacy analysis, literary analysis, and informational argumentative writing, 2 areas that they felt they needed to improve on. For mathematics, I mentioned before, grade 6 is piloting illustrative mathematics. Illustrative mathematics is an open source math program. It is being two companies that are able to share it now, but eventually it will be open source. And our grade 6 teachers are really finding it to be very beneficial for teaching all students. It comes with routines and practices already built in. You can see some of the other program features that are there. It is one of the programs, 6 through 8, it's been up for about 3 years. It reports, it meets all the expectations through the research analysis. They have created now a beta version for grades K through 5. And so we are going to seriously look at that program next year. We're going to try it out to see if it is a program that we want to adopt as a system. So K through 6 going forward, so I'll be distributing next year. It's really important, I think, as we move forward as a district, if we're thinking about building out MTSS, that we have a common program that we're using, that we're looking to see what are those common curriculum-based measures that we can use as a district, so we can see when students need a different level of intensity and support. And so this is something that I think as a district, we've finally come to this place, and I think for all of those reasons, it's an important move. And this is a program that really does fit with the way it's TM and is sharing what makes for good mathematics learning, and also aligns very well with the math standards. In the meantime, the junior high has been working with Better Lesson, which is a professional learning organization that is affiliated with illustrative math, and so they have been learning around about the routines and the different practices, things like the math language routines, emergencies in discourse about mathematics, which we know from Hattie is one of the most important classroom instructional practices, leading them to deeper understanding about mathematics, as well as those open quality tasks that all students can participate in. So we're actually very excited about the work that's happening in mathematics. At the school and the district level for science, technology, and engineering, all of the transitions are now in place for grades 3 through 6. You've heard quite a bit already about our STEAM goals, but just so you know, we are launching a STEAM website that will list all the goals and be able to show the progress we're making towards them over the next couple of years. We continue to build out our student-centered coaching model. You know, there is another STEAM coach in the FY21 budget for the Academia building. We then just really support all grade 4 with those new shifts in early physical science I mentioned earlier. We have engaged our educators in a data dialogue process. Every grade level is participating this year in a data dialogue process. And what's been important for science, because of the banding when the tests take place, we're now doing the same thing with grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 8. So for example, it's very important for our 3rd grade teachers to see the 5th grade MCAS scores so that they can understand their part in the 3 through 5 span and taking a look at that data. We are also inviting our NIMLE and tech educators and the pre-K 6 coordinators to the junior high science department meetings. So again, becoming more of a district in that way. So looking ahead to MCAS 2020, English language arts and math will be for grades 3, 8, and 10. Will all be next generation computer based. The same thing for science, technology, and engineering, grades 5 and 8. For grade 10 science, technology, and engineering, and grade 9, because some students take it, the biology at grade 9. We are moving away from STE and to biology from the state for science. Grade 10 can take the legacy test next year. They can take it paper-based. They can continue to take it the overlapping standards. I talked to our department chair. He feels that they're ready to all just go with the next generation test, take it computer-based, and all of the 2016 standards for next year, which is very exciting. So we're going to ask that we can do that. There is that option, and we'll see if the state allows us to do that. But that is our hope that all of our students will take the next gen test next year. And then I usually end just letting you know sort of what's on our plate coming up. We continue to unpack the new history and social studies science framework. It was approved in 2018. We did quite a bit of summer work, and we're continuing with that implementation plan over the next couple of years. Grades 3, 4, 5, and 6 have quite a few changes. So that's a lot for educators to build out and to resource and to learn. The digital literacy and computer science framework, again, continuing to apply those standards You know that there's also digital literacy specialists. That's in the FY21 budget for the high school. And one of the reasons is because there are digital literacy and computer science standards for high school students. And so now we'll have someone there who can support educators in implementing those standards. We have a new visual performing arts curriculum framework that was just approved this past summer. And so our two directors are unpacking those standards with their departments. And as the state's been saying the last couple of years, but finally they've said now that they should be able to get a final draft to the Board of Ed in the winter or the spring of 2020 for the new health curriculum frameworks. So that is on the horizon for us. So while all of these frameworks are being unpacked and implemented, I just wanted to share with you how important it is for us to be thinking on our end about an implementation plan, especially for our K through 6 educators. So besides all of that, the pre-K-6 literacy visioning, thinking about full-day kindergarten, the potential new math program, the STEAM learning, the science standards, perhaps the new health standards. And then we're thinking about the diagram that Peter also shared with us, and all the wonderful things on that diagram. Keeping that all in perspective, alongside MCAS and how we're using that as a guide to see where we're doing some things well and where we need to improve for our students. But I think it's important for us to think of how much new and how much change our educators can take off over time, and how important it is for us to be thoughtful about that and making sure that we have the supports in place so that the changes can be effective and long lasting. So that's just something to keep on looking at as we move forward. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Deb, for such a very thorough presentation. Does anyone have questions? Do you have questions?
I started. I typed my question. I actually want to go back to first few, I think at the very beginning, there's a ratio on each school. Yes. Can you explain again the middle column and the last one?
Okay.
Because I'm looking at, because I went back to look at the accountability, and I don't know whether we also take the student action, and we were talking about last year.
Yeah.
And
So the absenteeism is an indicator. It's one of the indicators. So high schools have more indicators than elementary schools do, or even the junior high does because of the advanced coursework, and also the rate of graduation. So those are two extra indicators that the high school has.
so is that included?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's one of the indicators. There's a target, and again, it's scored 0 through 4 points, whether or not how close you are to meeting that target.
So for example, the Douglas 54% substantial progress. Can you elaborate?
Sure. So there was a decline in the achievement for English language arts, for math and science, which is why it was 54%. And actually, the 54% is the cumulative for the 2 years. So it's 75% and 40, and how they're weighted is 60-40, and so therefore the 54 towards the goals. The growth was fine. They were on target for their growth. They're on target for attendance. There's those 3 achievement areas, and so.
So do you, I think Peter earlier and in the previous one, that how we make the accountability, I think there are some discussion that for the staff evaluation. So would this be linked and connected with that?
To the staff evaluation?
Right.
So I think the important piece that we're working on with staff evaluation is giving feedback around the teaching all students standard and having educators write more effective or more complete student learning goals for their students. And so as the school, I know that they also have their school improvement plan, so those are goals as well. And sometimes the educators' goals are also tied to the school improvement plan. So yes, there are certainly some connections in that way.
My understanding is that we are supposed to identify targets and report out to the Department of Education in the spring, targets for closing the gap. No?
So the department sets goals for us, sets targets for us. Yeah.
can actually touch base. I think that's actually a piece of the new Student Opportunity Act, that they will be requiring districts to identify strategies to close equity gaps within the district. We have received zero guidance so far. I know that's surprising. But we have not received any guidance from the state, SEU, legislature, or anything. So we'll certainly come back on committee and meet.
Thank you, yes, I appreciate that. Okay. May I ask another question? Okay. While I have you here.
Sure.
The literacy, the approach to literacy, that seems like it's a living document. You had a slide in here, I didn't see it tonight, that had the K2 on it, and it's later on in the all-day K, so maybe I'll save that comment to them. But I wanted to get your reaction. Maybe I'm going to save my question actually for all-day K then,
Okay.
since that slide didn't appear here. I didn't want to.
Right, it's part of the kindergarten presentation.
Okay.
This slide and a number of the other slides have percentiles on them. And I have to say, it was a little bit difficult for me, not being familiar with these particular data sets, to look at this and understand what a significant difference is. So for slides of this type, if there was some footnote at the bottom that says differences of 3% or 5% or something are not considered significant, that would be helpful in reviewing the material. The other point that I wanted to touch on is you talked about the importance of common programs, and specifically with respect to the elementary schools. Could you talk about how well we're doing in terms of having common formative assessments, how we attempt to do that and what we might need to do in the future?
So because we built out new science investigations, we do have common assessments at the end of every investigation. So that's inherent in the new investigations that we created. We'll be similarly doing that for social studies with the new frameworks that we use out there. The challenge for the district has always been around literacy and math, because those are the two areas I've been in the district now 20 years, that schools have been left to choose what programs they're using. And so having common assessments across the district has always been a challenge in that way. Even when we had to do the district determined measures years ago for the evaluation process, I remember having a really hard time with teachers trying to figure out what would make for a good math assessment, because with different programs you're doing different units at different times. Right? So it's one of the rationales for having one math program, so we can begin to create those kinds of assessments, whether they come with the program or we create other assessments or we have other kinds of universal screening tools that we can use. We know that there will be some consistency across the district. That is the work of the literacy community as well, is to identify those screening tools that teachers will be using, special educators will be using, reading specialists will be using. So my goal, my hope is within the next year to 2 years for math and ELA for us to have those common assessments across the district.
So on your pie charts of the lowest quartile, yep.
It's fine.
Nope.
It's fine.
Yep. Okay, so to me that looks incredibly concerning, that half of our lowest quartile is on IEPs. Am I reading that correctly? That our lowest quartile is represented by 50% of students that. I know that you had noted on one of the other slides that a certain percentage of the kids that did fall in the lowest quartile were still meeting expectations.
Yep.
Is that the case in this
So I don't
area?
have that level of detail. I can certainly go and take a look at that for you and get that.
So obviously we're planning on working with you. That's pretty clear.
And it's one of the reasons why we're working with you now. It's one of the reasons why we're working with the co-teaching. It's one of the reasons why we're trying to break down the silos between special ed and gen ed.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
It's also one of the reasons in this budget request, you're seeing us trying to provide more special educators within special education, and trying to make sure that, fundamentally, when a student receives services through special education, we don't want them pulled out of content instruction to receive supplementary instruction, because they need to have that content instruction, and it needs to be supported appropriately. And that's a process that we're trying to move to gradually. But then when we do pull them out of content instruction, we need to make sure that the person providing that instruction has the right qualifications to meet the needs of the student. And that's something that we're trying to do gradually over a period of time.
Yeah, I do want to make just a quick follow-up. So if, looking at the slides starting in 20 through, when we start to look at those lowest quartiles, we're actually pretty well balanced in terms of the group as a whole versus the lowest quartile, with the exception of this, which was really telling. And then if you could go to slide 30 real quick. This for me was another sort of alarm around the non-disabled and disabled in their growth distribution, where you see those students who were classified as non-disabled, 22% of the students were in that highest growth, whereas you flip that, 20% of the students, 24% of the students with disability were in the lowest growth. So to me, this is sort of the other data set that complements what we were looking at on the previous slide.
There's two ends of those that range.
Yeah.
Two ends, yeah.
So my hope is as we continue to, we've clearly identified that this is an issue, we've got plans in place to work on it. What would be very helpful is to sort of keep the presentation of the data somewhat similar from year to year, because this is obviously something that you want to be able to track and have comparable progress.
Did you have a follow-up to say thing?
Yes. Given this and the previous slide, it shows that we have some work to do. The question I have is there money in this current budget to help shore up these issues? And is there going to be money in the budget for next year to help shore up these issues?
So, I think, one, we're looking quite a bit at special education in this year's budget. And I don't want to tie a budget expense to how we're targeting improvements in MCAS performance. MCAS is a kind of a post-mortem indicator of how your whole system is functioning and how systems are functioning within the school. And so we're targeting money to improve the function of key areas around equity, particularly in special education this year. So is it to just address MCAS performance? Absolutely not. Should a likely outcome be that we can improve our MCAS performance? Yes, but as well as a whole variety of other student outcomes as well along the way, if that makes sense.
So, so I'll just add to the other outcome would be that when students are pulled from their classroom, oftentimes what they're missing is their classroom where they communicate and conversations and discussions that happen. And so it's supposed to be extra intensive, and so receiving grade level math instruction and other kinds of math instruction is such an important piece like this. And so the more we can have special educators pushing into classrooms and working in the classroom, so we're first kids all.
The other area I think there's significant money still in the budget is around professional learning for educators and also under curriculum. So what David explained, I think, earlier, and I know was really looking at a new math program at the elementary schools, so we can have a consistent approach to math, and one that has been validated by quite a bit of research. So that's, I think, important. And then as well, we're continuing to do a lot of professional learning around early reading skills for our students across the district, and that's a focus as well. So those are areas that we're certainly continuing to support the budget as well.
A couple shorter questions and then one maybe more broad question. So one just short question that I have is when you're looking at the category of meet and exceed expectations, is that ever broken out with meet and exceed separately, or is the data always together?
It's broken out separately.
It is, okay. That would be interesting to see. And then also, I understand the importance of looking really closely at growth in the lowest quartile, and I was wondering if we're also looking at that in the other quartiles as well.
So I did more aggregate for you in the growth here. But I can sort by grade and by different, so separated out by quartile, first, second, third quartile.
That would be interesting to see. I hear that a lot from parents if there's concern and interest quartiles, so sort of the middle two quartiles growth. And then just sort of piggybacking on what John said about how it would be helpful to have what percentiles really change. One of the questions I have when I'm looking at these slides is what the context is for how AP compares to the state. And I wonder that a lot when we're looking at this information. For example, what percentage of our lowest quartile is meeting expectations? 10%. How does that compare to the state? And you know that so much of our lowest quartile is made up of kids who are low income was a startling statistic to see, and I'm wondering how that compares to the state. Are we unique, or is that consistent?
I can certainly share with you that all of our meeting and exceeding scores were above the state. We met traditionally above the state. What I tend to do is a comparison of our comparable districts to see where we are. And I can do that. Some school committee members prefer that we do that, and some don't to share that information, but I do just to see where we are. What's interesting is our comparables compared to what the state considers our comparables when we think about the demographic composition of our students, as well as the wealth of our town and our expenditure per student. It's very different than our comps. And so it's just interesting to see, just something to think about in the future when we like to work comps.
I would like to point out the other thing, I just actually got in to see if we had it, but a lot of the students that are in the IEP, free and reduced lunch, and other categories, they're in the high needs category, and unfortunately help disaggregate the lowest quartile by that group, and many kids are there like 3 times. So I'm not discounting the legitimacy of any of the data, just indicating that in some cases it's kids that are hitting multiple sorts of pockets. So there are a lot of things going on in our program.
So last time we were talking about that we have the coaching, right? So I was wondering that do we have numbers that in terms of, because last time we were talking about we want to look at the student progress based on per student. So by looking at this number, okay, it's alarming, but if this group of students has making significant progress from year to year, that's what we want to see. So do we have that kind of information? And the second question is, I kind of want to know a little more about the trial of the math. Okay, maybe you can help to elaborate a little bit more about how we choose the product, how we choose the curriculum. Is that from the state, or how are we going to launch out the trial? I want to learn a little more about that.
Thank you. Just on the, we can talk to the coaching piece, but just on the math piece, I would actually almost suggest that that's a separate topic, because that's probably a topic in and of itself.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, no, just from a time perspective, in terms of coaching, we've actually really just gotten our coaches on board this year. So there's no past data that we can really pull from, because it's still a relatively new program. I think, the one challenge we'll probably have is we don't withhold coaching from anyone, so we don't have a, true research analysis that we'll be able to do. I do know that at Douglas School, where we have some real clear goals in terms of raising student achievement in ELA, mathematics, and science, the coaches are an integral piece of that in working with classroom teachers around the types of instruction they need to support all students.
I'm Bill Goodline. Some of you know I've been doing MCAS analysis for the Special Education Parent Advisory Council for a number of years now. In fact, it predates student growth percentile, now 12 years of data. I bring a report that's been vetted by the PAC. But during the course of my work, I did have noticed kind of interesting trend that I kind of want to make you aware of and perhaps generate discussion about. That has to do with the change in student growth percentile over the last 2 years, so 2017 compared to 2018, 2019 data. And there's been kind of a broad decline in growth percentile for both English and math in many, but not all grades. So example, in the 10th grade, where we had, of course, 2 years of data because the growth percentile is 8 in 10th grade. In 2017, the student growth percentile for ELA was 71, and then in 2018, 62, and then 59.3, so it declined 11.7 points. From the cohorts of 450 kids. In the case of math, for the 10th graders, it went from 68 to 57.3. Again, 10.7 point decline. 8th grade math declined 15.3 points, although ELA for 8th graders was up 1.1 to 50.1, so basically state median, state average. In 7th grade, ELA went down 18.9 points over 2 years, 8.7 in math. And the 6th graders, which had been, they've had phenomenal growth over the last several years. 2017, the ELA growth of 76, down to 62.6, which is still very good, but a decline of 13.4 points. In the case of math, in 2017, the 6th graders were in 82. They had a student growth percentile of 82, which is amongst the best in the state. This most recent year, 64.3, so 17.7 points down. So while the numbers still are good relative to other school districts, do we have an idea of why they declined? And I guess one thought I had was that, if you recall, we had to establish a number of programs to reduce student stress. We had done some homework adjustments, reduce that. And could it be that this is kind of the price we pay for reducing the level of stress that the students were going through, and therefore expect these lower levels of growth in the future? So that was one of the things I find from my work. I wanted to share with you because it affects the whole district. Questions?
Was there, did you say you're writing a report on that we're going to get to see?
Eventually, we typically, it's really more focused on students with disabilities. So eventually it comes up through the special education director
Okay.
here.
I'm sure everybody would be interested in seeing that.
Okay.
Here. Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Good?
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Sure. So I think, so there are quite a few variables here for us to talk about. The first would be that as we talk about the new test and going over to the new design of the test, we were one of the districts that said we were not going to participate in PARC until it was something that we knew we were going to have to participate in. And so we know the next generation test is very much PARC-like. Right from the commissioner. And so just the experience with taking the test online the last couple of years, the composition of the new tests, the way it's structured, I do think that's one of the variables. A high school test is a completely different test than it was the legacy test to the new test now. So that's for 10th grade, absolutely the last 2 years, very different test. I don't think, is there causality or correlation? I think I'd be hard-pressed to say no. I don't think there's causality. It's hard to separate out. Might there be some correlation? I think keeping everything in balance is an important piece for us. And I think when I look at our comparables, yes, we are right within the range of our comparable communities. We're trying to deal with all the different things that we're dealing with, which is a change in our demographics, which is another variable and a component to all of this, as well as test design, instructional materials, and helping educators learn all that they need to learn. So.
Yeah, I just want to follow up with you on what you just responded. You mentioned that there is a factor that probably change of the demographics. Yeah, can you explain how that change, caused this drop down?
So it's not necessarily even a causality. I just think it's a variable when we're talking about teaching students. When we have students who are moving into our district who have had some disrupted learning, that's a concern, and we have had an increase in that. We've had an increase, you've seen our numbers just in terms of our students with disabilities, our students with economic disadvantage, our students with English language as a second language. I mean, all of those are different variables and challenges to teaching. So with that increase, it creates other kinds of stresses on the classroom and the kinds of materials that we need and the practices that we need to make sure our educators are well equipped with.
You know, I think what would be helpful too, and, you know, Bill, if you send us that information, then we can take a good look at it. That would actually help us rather than feeling like we're making up an answer to a question. That way we can really dig into it and look at it. No, great, thank you.
Thank you. We've come a long way in 4 years, and I never really thought I would be sitting here listening to you describe how we are moving toward district-wide anything. So, you know, while it makes me a little bit nervous to give up the autonomy that I think that buildings and teachers need in the classroom, this is a needed change. So, and I know it's a lot of work. I just want to say my thanks.
Thank you, Diane. I think what's important for us to always keep in mind is we can have some common and consistent things in the district and still allow for some autonomy in the classroom, right? So the teachers are professional in the classroom, the students are in front of them, they're making decisions. But having some consistent tools and measures across the district so that we can support and provide the needed, necessary, whether it's materials or resources or professional learning, that's on us to make sure that we have those things in place. So.
Great, thank you so much, Deb.
Thanks.
Budget.
Budget.
I will see.
Yes, you're listed as a presenter on the agenda, but I think maybe we'll give you a break. All right, so up next we have the budget update, and we are going to be asked to make a decision about the kindergarten funding piece of the budget for next year. So just keep that in mind as we listen to the presentation.
So this is not actually a presentation on budget. Instead, yeah, I did a memo. If you recall the last budget presentation we did, there was some feedback from the committee asking us to look at some additional strategies to reduce the budget and the impact of both of the towns. So we took a look with the budget subcommittee as well as our staff and took a look at some strategies to be able to reduce the overall impact of the budget. And the memo in front of you, and I apologize, it was not given to you prior to the meeting, but we wanted to get some input from the budget sub this morning, so timing didn't allow for much turnaround on it. Essentially what we're coming forward with is a recommendation to reduce an additional $522,000 from the budget. So that is really found in 4 areas. One is around personnel costs, and we're able to reduce the budget by about $275,000 due to some additional retirements and salary adjustments that we've made. Capital improvement plan, what we're going to recommend is to level fund the capital improvement plan with this year. We are still funding our capital plan at $1.25 million next year. So we still have an opportunity to continue capital growth even though we're limiting the growth of the increase. That is actually has potential to be offset because we're about to go into bond on the capital debt that we did last year. And the interest rates have come down significantly, even since last year when it was proposed to the towns. So we're hoping that we can realize some of the savings through that bond rate. And then we also are recommending to level fund right now the Essex Valley Collaborative Family Support Partner with this year. It does mean we will limit the number of families district-wide that will be able to have access to that. But if we need to save some money, it's a way of looking at a program that doesn't involve our own staff district-wide. And then Case Collaborative, we actually had a little bit of good news that the Case Collaborative, after a couple of years of very hard work by their staff there, was actually able to realize some budget surpluses over a couple of years. And if you remember a couple of years ago, they actually had some pretty difficult financial circumstances at the collaborative. Right now, they just certified their version of excess and deficiency, and they are 3% over their allowable limit of their reserve funding. So they will be refunding that to the communities. The superintendents of each town within Case comprise the board of directors. We voted to have that be a credit toward FY21 expenses for each district. So we're anticipating probably around $80,000 is the Acton Boxborough share of that. The actual refund is based on the allocable share of expenses that we pay into the district. We are one of 10 districts in case, however, we comprise about 20% of their expenses between transportation and tuition. So it helps us, those four items get us to about $522,000. And then what I did on the other side of the memo, you can see how that shifted, the adjustments. And essentially, what it does is it brings the increase of the overall budget down to 3.18%. And then that becomes 3.26% to Acton and 1.41% to Boxborough. We felt that that was more on target with the range that I think we received the feedback on in the last meeting. And then this still includes an opportunity to reduce kindergarten tuition by $750 per student is actually included within that number. So if you look at the bottom graph there in the chart, excuse me, not graph, the chart, you can see if we reduce the tuition by $750 to $3,750, and we choose to offset that with E&D funds, which is something that we discussed at the last meeting, that will keep that increase to 3.18 and then 3.26 to Acton and 1.41. That does assume using about $1 billion of excess and deficiency into next year's budget. If we did not reduce the tuition and we left it at $4,500, we would also recommend not using additional ED funds. That would bring our budget down to 2.98% as an increase, so it would be under 3%. But that would not change the assessments because we're removing the excess and deficiency funds. If for some reason, and I'm not recommending it, but if for some reason the committee wanted to use the E&D still, but keep tuition the same, then we could actually get the assessment down to just about 3% Acton, just over 1% in Boxborough. But, you know, I think my preference would be not to use that level of reserves unless we're doing something to really move the education forward. So just to give you a sense of overall budget impact and where we're at now. So I'm happy to take any feedback around that. I don't know if Dave, you have any other comments on those few items?
In the event there are questions.
Yeah. Any feedback around those 4 points?
Yeah, I just had one quick question about the Aspen Valley Collaborative. I know that this, I believe, was our first year of engaging with them for the wraparound services, and I'm just curious about sort of what percent of utilization are we adding this year as a gauge for the sort of the justification for removing the ability to expand for next year.
Right now, we're very low because we just unveiled it with all the schools and had our initial meeting. So that's why it's an area that, because we don't have the current utilization, we wouldn't be taking away services from people who already have them. It would just limit our ability. We have to be thoughtful this year about who we have it and careful about not having multi-year cases. Is that, Don, do you have anything to add on that?
The question, just so that everybody understands, if we were to fund all day K or the reduction in tuition this year using E&D in future budgets, we would be incorporating that additional $180,000 into our base budget. Is that correct?
That is correct. I think if we were to use solely E&D funds this year, I think if we tried to do that more than 1 year and not start to incorporate it into the budget, I would think we would, you know, run dangerously low in our reserves pretty quickly.
And with respect to page 1 and the reductions and the change between the preliminary budget and the preliminary adjusted budget, the change, you know, in terms of Acton from 3.98%, almost 4% down to 3.2%, 3.26%. You know, I think that is highly significant. You know, as a reminder to everybody who doesn't follow it, Acton is at the levy limit, so that, you know, normally our revenues would be going up 2.5%, a little bit more. 3.26% 6% is a number that is sort of near sustainability, 4% is not. So I'm very glad to see, these changes putting us on a path to a more sustainable budget. And then last, I'll just comment with respect to all-day K. My personal view is that we should not take a move towards reduction in tuition, at this point in time, and we should conserve in
This is the part of the meeting where we're going to have the discussion about what, right?
We have one more presentation just on all-day K.
Well, so that's what I said, presentation, and you said, no, it's just a.
Well, there's two items though. This is
I
the
know.
budget update, and that's the K presentation.
But they're listed as one thing on my agenda. And without, I mean, well, they're listed as two things on the agenda, but there's only one sheet
Got it.
in the packet.
Yeah, so we are doing we have
Thanks,
several
Ted.
slides on kindergarten coming up, so it might be
Okay,
worth
so
to
we
get
wanna-
through that
okay.
first and then I think
Fair
we'll
enough. Go ahead.
So I do want to make one more comment on this preliminary adjusted budget. And that was, I know that at our budget subcommittee meeting, and in fact, in a school committee meeting, the question was asked, could we take another percentage or $500,000 out of it? And I have to say that my personal concern originally was that to do that, I was afraid or concerned around reduction of services in general to our students across the board. And so I have to commend you for the work that was done here to find these numbers to come up with $500,000 reduction in the budget without significant impact to the services that we deliver to our students. So thank you for that.
So I'm just curious about where we're at with ED. I remember we're pretty close to the upper limit. And okay.
We're at the lower limit.
We're at the lower limit.
At the lower limit, yes.
Okay, and that is before we do.
That's
Of our policy.
lower limit of the policy, right?
Policy, right.
And that's as of July 1st, 2019.
And is that with or without the accounting for use E&D for college?
So the last certification was as of July 1st, and that included the funds that were $690,000 that would be used in FY20. And that's as far as the state goes. The state does a postmortem. So these numbers that you're looking at here would be toward next year's certification. There's going to be a slide in the next presentation too about impact of full-day K tuition and E&D, but the numbers here aren't really relevant, Paul, because we don't know what the final tally for FY20 is as far as termbacks and replenishment of the reserve.
Did you ask specifically about this or about the other?
I just want to clarify that we talk about, so for the first one, for the 750 reduction, then it will be like a plan that we're going to have 750 reduction for the year, but it's going to be based on annual decision, right?
So when we get to that place, and forgive me for being confused, because on the agenda, it says 3.2 for his budget thing, and in my packet, it says agenda item number 3.2, which has a presentation, which lists what our suggested motions are going to be for when we make the decision about kindergarten. So we're going to get to that in a minute. Okay. So we're going to do the presentation?
We are, yes.
Are we ready?
We're ready.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Well, this is planned. Thank you, everybody.
Here we are.
Here we are. Yes.
Well, that's good because that matches my packet. All three of you.
Tessa, it's all right.
Okay, so tonight we're going to ask you to give us some direction and take a vote for funding and tuition for all the kindergarten for September. We present to all of our wonderful incoming kindergarten parents on January 7th, and we would love to be able to tell them what the tuition is or isn't. This slide just shows you kind of a list of what we've gone over since January. And I know you've reviewed all of those packets to be up to date. So tonight we're going to begin by going into some detail about the Student Opportunity Act. Dave is going to do that. Deb is going to talk a bit about curriculum as it relates to all-day kindergarten. And then I'll come back and talk about funding models.
Thank you. Hopefully by now, you've at least heard of the Student Opportunity Act, if I call it SOA. It's been in the papers. I mean, this will have an impact on every district in the state. It's huge news. This presentation is to look at the SOA and what it potentially means to implementing tuition-free full-day kindergarten in the district. To fully understand it, I'll just do that one. John, full disclosure, my picture was edited out of this presentation.
In that case, Dave, I will hold you harmless.
That's right. So there
Triple dad jokes.
to fully understand the SOA as a background, you need to know 4 terms: foundation budget, local contribution, hold harmless, and Student Opportunity Act. Not going to go into great detail about them. This is in 11 bullet points, coincidentally enough, what you need to know to have a full understanding of the ramifications for the SOA to the district. For the best background possible, go to the DESE website, or even better, go to the Mass Budget and Policy Center website. I've mentioned this before. Ask me if you need to know specifically. Dave, what do I need to know about this? And I can direct you. I'm going to leave the slide up. What you need to know is that the SOA will increase the foundation budget for the district. It will increase foundation aid, presumably at some point. Typically, it would increase foundation aid immediately, but due to hold harmless, I'll explain that it's going to take several years for our Chapter 70 aid to increase, if at all, and there's a caveat there. If we can go to the next one. Here's what you need to know what the SOA means to the district. As I'll show you on the next slide, it's going to increase the district's foundation budget potentially by $3.75 billion. That's important to know that. You can read the asterisks. All of the numbers that I'm presenting here are my estimates based on my interpretation of how the SOA is going to be implemented. The problem with an increase in foundation budget of $3.75 billion, and all other things being equal, that means that the district would get $3,750,000, is right now, as in FY20, we are $2.8 million over what the formula says we should get in Chapter 8, and that's referred to as hold harmless. So if you take the foundation budget, that's the first number, subtract out the district's required contribution, which is the second number, and pretty much a separate calculation from foundation budget, and that can remain a constant in this discussion. The difference says we should get a certain amount of money for Chapter 78, but we get $2.8 million more than that, because years ago, the amount would have declined by operation of the formula, but the state has said it's not going to give anybody less money than it had the year before, and in fact, districts get a minimum aid allotment. And minimum aid, as you'll see, works in opposition to the SOA providing a benefit to the district. So eliminating full-day K tuition will reduce E&D in the short term, and once we are past hold harmless or post-hold harmless, it will increase the foundation budget, and if we're out of hold harmless, it will increase Chapter 78. The next slide is just really quickly to show you that I actually calculated, you can see those are the 11 foundation budget categories in the first column. The second column under FY20 is this year's foundation budget right off the Department of Ed website by category. The next one, FY 2027, 7 years from now, are those categories with the FY 20 students. Foundation budget is all on a per student basis, and the rates that are in the Student Opportunity Act. The Act itself has 2 tables with rates by category per student. I plug them in, and there you see where I come up with $3.75 million increase at the end of implementation, theoretically 2027. Hold harmless is nothing new. I put up a chart. Since full regionalization, the district's Chapter 78 has consisted of, the district's foundation budget, I should say, has consisted of 4 components. The dark blue on this is the district's contribution. So the local contribution that's separately determined from the foundation budget. You can see that that's waffled and then has increased the last couple of years. The yellow bar is the foundation aid. So that's what the district should get if the formula holds. If the foundation budget minus local contribution, that's what we should be getting in Chapter 70. But the state has, for the last 6 years, including this one, given the district a minimum aid increase. It's been as low as $20 and as high as $55. It doesn't show up there, but I put it in red so you can at least see that every year it's been in there. And then you see the green bar, that's the amount by which we exceed what the formula says we should get, and that's the hold harmless amount. And until that green bar goes to 0, we won't see any benefit from the SOA. That's pretty high level and pretty fast talking. So if there are questions, I'm happy to try to answer them quickly. And some of this may be repetitive to some. So the next slide is just graphically. I tried to present graphically what it looks like, because remember, the key is hold harmless needs to go to 0. So all of these lines are the district's hold harmless balance, and as you can see, I put it at FY20, we're at $2.8 million. Under certain assumptions, as far as the elimination of tuition for full-day kindergarten, those are models 3 through 5, so the yellow line, the green line, and the purple line. That shows how quickly the hold harmless goes to 0. And you say, well, the Model 3 looks pretty good. It gets down pretty quickly. The problem with Model 3 is it doesn't get below the line. And until it's to 0, we get no additional Chapter 78. But in the meantime, what happens is everything to the left of that line would have to come from the district's reserves from E&D. So if we were to fully implement free full-day kindergarten, say, which is Model 3 in FY21, as you'll see in a future slide, it's going to cost us out of E&D, but it won't get us the benefits of the SOA any sooner than will the green line, which is implementing in 23. In both of those cases, they hit the bottom of that scale in FY24. These are graphic representations of scenarios. I won't have a really good handle on this until, at a minimum, when the governor's budget comes out and I can see authoritatively what the implementation plan is, and other things like the rate of inflation for next year's foundation budget, the municipal revenue growth factor for both towns. There are a lot of variables that when I have looked at my model and tweaked a variable in a small amount in one direction or another, it has a big impact on the overall numbers. But I'll come back to what's represented in this graph in the next presentation. And at some point in the future, yes, I'll have more to say, probably in late January when the governor's budget comes out about this fun topic.
I'm kind of struggling to understand. Are you saying that if we went to universal all-day kindergarten next year, we would get credit for all those full-time students that we now don't get credit for, but because we're getting more than our foundation aid budget requires, the addition of that student wouldn't result in any additional money from the state?
Correct. So think of it this way, and I'll try and do this in a real big picture fashion. So let's say that there's $1.2 million increase in the foundation budget. If all of those, I can tell you exactly what it is. $1,370,000 is what's in the foundation budget this year, FY20, for half-day kindergarten kids. If those kids were full-time, that number would be doubled. It's a straight linear calculation, and our foundation budget would go up $1,370,000. Has no impact on local contribution, so it would increase Chapter 70 foundation aid by $1,370,000. But foundation aid and Chapter 78 are different because of hold harmless. So hold harmless is 2.8. It would come down by about half. But it would still, we wouldn't get anything over and above. There'll be some benefit from the SOA, but not enough to make up that difference. And on top of everything else, as you heard in a previous presentation, enrollment is down this school year. And the enrollment for this school year impacts next school year's foundation budget. And so what I expect, hold harmless is going to go up next year primarily because of the enrollment decline.
You could blow this question off if it's not really appropriate for this forum, but is an inflation factor included in the legislation around SOA, or will the legislature year by year be addressing inflation?
I believe the legislation says the words before inflation. So inflation is determined in conjunction with the DOR annually, and that's not a very easy one to predict. It's based on the way they do it can cause fluctuations from year to year. And so until they come out, my model has an inflation factor in it. If it's off by a little, the foundation budget's off a lot, because remember, our foundation budget this year is $57.5 million. 1% is almost $600,000. But the answer to the question, John, is there isn't a built-in inflation adjustment in the SOA. It's a target rate to be phased in over 7 years before any inflation adjustments.
Dave, I don't have a question, but I just want to say, I always admire how you take a very complicated issue and you break it down really quickly. So thank you for that.
Well, if that's what I did, I appreciate the comment.
All right. Next.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about schedules first. I think schedule can show you how curriculum can then be implemented. This is not a full-blown curriculum presentation. If it was, I mean, we probably a whole lot of time to go into all the different aspects around the curriculum. But I want to give you a little bit of a preview of what a full day full-day K program could look like. So this is one, I want to give you a few examples. This is a half-day kindergarten schedule for just one teacher for 1 week. So this is not necessarily representative for all of our teachers and all of our kindergarten programs. And this was actually from several years ago when there were more half-day kindergarten programs, days rather. So you can see that outside of specials here, there's about 10 hours of instructional time. And so when we think about teaching all that we need to for our students and giving them these different kinds of experiences, there are about 2 blocks, solid blocks of teaching time in the morning each day. And then if we're looking at a full day, what we presently have, and again, this is just one snapshot, one teacher for 1 week. This slide and the next slide shows you about what one full week would look like. Again, outside, not including specials, this is the way one teacher scheduled her time. There are about 13 hours of instructional time. I think you can see that there are quite a few transitions for children. There's times when other folks are coming into the classroom, times for snack, times for recess, time for story, time for rest. Both slides, you can see the afternoon schedule with a little bit more exploration, which is what we say because we have a half-day program. And so the afternoon is more around some exploration and some extension. If we're looking at a full day and how it can be programmed for our kindergarten children around different curricular areas, this is the Boston Public School curriculum. They call it K2. They call their pre-Ks K1. Their kindergartens are K2, so that's why the name is called Focus on K2. What they have here is they're calling it Integrated Kindergarten Day, and it includes center time, and then it's also combined with large and small group instruction time. The children engage in all the different curricular components. So you'll see at the very top, we have about 90 minutes of center time. And during the center times when their projects emerge, the centers include an art studio, a block area, dramatization, library and listening, science and discovery, and writing and drawing. Several years ago, I did a presentation for all of you with a committee on Ready to Learn, and we talked about guided play. This is very much where all of that guided play would take place in all these different center areas. And during this time, students are collaborating, they're building, exploring, designing, acting. Students have choice of their centers. There's some student-initiated exploration as well as adult-initiated. But educators are expected to use students' own interests and their skills as guide and entry points, allowing students to take the activities in their own way. So science and social studies are taught through these different projects. And then you can see the intro to centers and then the thinking and feeding. So there's that making meaning time at the end. But that's also where students are practicing, and actually throughout all the center time, but learning their SEL and practicing their SEL skills like self-awareness, self-regulation, and building relationships. So the literacy block, which is the next block down, includes a foundational skills block, the read aloud, writing, and storytelling. And then after that, about 60 to 70 minutes of mathematics. Not every day, I think, according to how BPS does it, we might do that differently, as well as the very specific SEL curriculum that we use. Some of the explicit instructional practices that are woven into all of this programming is discourse, experiential learning across different disciplines, addressing variance in children's development, active agency, and documentation of teaching and learning. The documentation piece really comes from the Reggio Emilia program, which is in Italy, which has a lot to do with making sure that for very young children especially, the process of learning, validating that is important as what it is that they produce, and being able to show all along the way that process. The documentation, whether it's on their observations, writing down their observations as they're working, their writing, their drawing, their paintings, all of that is learning. And so more like a portfolio-based approach. And so that's how one way that full-day programming can be developed. We have written to Boston Public Schools. I am waiting to hear. I've asked for about 6 or 7 district and school leaders if we can go and visit and talk to the designer, if we can talk to the principals and the teachers just to get a sense of how it's working there. Needham also adopted this full-day K programming, and there are others out there as well, but it would be good for us to get a sense of what a full-day can look like. I just want to share that piece with you.
just clarify, if we were to start today, looking at really developing the curriculum for full day, how long would that take, do you feel, before we could actually implement that fully?
So, given all the other things that I mentioned before and that we're looking at and doing, and I think we would have to have some time to work with our educators around all of this, I'd be hard pressed to say this fall, so probably a year from September, the fall of 2021 would be reasonable.
And that doesn't necessarily mean we couldn't go to a full day schedule. It simply means in order to really go through this curriculum the way Deb was describing, it does certainly take time.
Because you can see from the other full days, very different organizations of the day, because it's really a half day explained into full day time. This is full day curriculum programming, which is very different and a different mindset that goes into it from the very beginning.
Are you ready for questions? Sure.
In the districts that you're looking at that have this full day K curriculum, how often are you seeing, or is there interest in a transitional kindergarten for the, I don't remember the exact, the 10 to 20% of kids who maybe would have wanted half day, assuming we only offered all day kindergarten. The transitional kindergarten, is that something that you're exploring? Or?
Yeah, we can certainly take a look to see. I think most districts now have full day. I don't know how many have actually been doing the transitional. It's certainly something we can look at. I don't think even in Boston have it, but I can see what other districts do. Yeah, and they'll give us some time to explore that a little bit more.
Thank you for the presentation. I kind of want to follow up on Peter's question. So in the teaching and learning department right now, how many curriculum specialists do we have that help develop these types of curriculum?
Yeah, so we have a pre-K to 2 literacy and social studies coordinator. We have our math coordinator, which is pre-K to 8. So she covers some pretty wide swath of those. And then we have our science, technology, engineering coordinator, and she too is K6. So 3 coordinators. Our digital literacy coordinator, she's pre-K to 12. So she will be helping out as well.
And I'm going to assume that those amazing coordinators are also involved in the history and social studies curriculum, the digital literacy curriculum, the visual performing arts curriculum, the health curriculum, and the pre-K to 6 literacy programs that you mentioned earlier this evening.
So maybe not as much in the performing arts and visual arts curriculum. Tangentially, yes, though, as we do a unit on sound, and so certainly our science and technology coordinator works with the music department and has actually conducted workshops for them in that. So there are some connections, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, for me, can I make a comment on it? So this, for me, was sort of the missing piece around all the presentation. Was, you know, financially, there's clearly sort of the black and white side of the financial, but what's the curriculum impact, and when can we deliver an all-day kindergarten curriculum to our students, and what amount of time does it take to prepare that and deliver that and get the inputs that are required to do that correctly? And so for me, this was a real aha moment to say, even if we chose to remove the cost altogether for next year, we actually wouldn't be well prepared to deliver that curriculum in that 1 year time. So for me, this sort of closed the loop around the curriculum and the budget side of this to say, yeah, we could and should make a decision tonight about our long-term strategy, but in terms of implementing it immediately, for me, there's so much that the team is already doing around curriculum development that I wouldn't want to pile on another thing that needs to be delivered for next fall.
As soon as we know what the timeline is, we're actually very excited to engage in this work. We just want to make sure that it's done very thoughtfully and carefully, and that we can support it so that it is a good experience for all our students.
Deb, since a number of our peer communities have had all-day K for a number of years, is there evidence that they have generated, you know, superior academic growth in some sense in grades 1 to 3 because they have those all-day K programs?
So, I mean, the only evidence I would have to look at, I guess, would be our MCAS scores in grade 3. Internal measurements I certainly could find out from our other peer districts. our third grade scores, when I looked at our comparables, we're ahead of some of our comps, actually quite a few of our comps.
So, obviously, there are lots of, interesting things that we can provide to students over the course of the time that they are in the district. I continue to be of the opinion that our opportunity to add value to students, these very young students, is actually limited, and that we send to parents and families a long message about, how best those years might be used. I'm fully cognizant that we have a variety of family situations in the district. There are single-parent families, there are two-parent families, and there are people who are fortunate because they have extended families. In each of those circumstances might lead one to make different choices about more formal education and more organic education. I really think that given the combination of the financial situation and the fact that there are options that families can exercise for that period of time in children's lives, as well as the lack of evidence that peer communities who have invested in this have generated, in a dimension that we care about, a superior result. I just see that there's no reason to move forward with this at this time.
One second, Michael. Just to follow up on what John sort of asked, I'm curious, I know you said that Needham is doing this K2 thing and Boston does that. I'm curious, I am curious. Do all districts that, I was sort of answering the question myself, but do all districts that move to a full day go through a similar, you said there's different programs on K2, or do they just stretch out their day? Because that would affect how you really look at impact. If you're making a thoughtful approach towards really adjusting your curriculum and making it, meaningful in a whole day as opposed, because there are a lot of people who view full day, and it's certainly the way we do it here, as just a sort of lengthening of a particular curriculum piece. But I would be curious how many districts engage in this deep work around really implementing a thoughtful kindergarten curriculum that is appropriate. Did you have a question?
I just want to continue on the first question that John asked. He just mentioned that the girls in the grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. But I really want to know, if we have any evidence to show that the full day kindergarten students are outperform the half day kindergarten students when they are in grade 1, grade 2, not just only grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and all through the entire elementary school, junior and high, and when they graduate from high school, right? So do we have any evidence to show that, that because, student A was the full day kindergarten, and then because of that, he's outperformed the half day kindergarten student before. So do we have such evidence?
I think we shared with you the last time some of our own internal data around some of what we looked at for the end of kindergarten with our literacy assessment. And then we looked out to grade 3 in terms of MCAS. So our own internal data did not show a big difference in half day or full day. We don't have anything that would go further to be able to do a back view all the way from students' college placements. We don't really engage in that. I think one of the things I did also share with you the research, just the general research that's out there, which shows that there is an academic GPA bump, and that it does fade by the end, sometimes by second grade, sometimes by third grade. What's interesting though is that the research around early intervention is very strong, and so it's hard to sort of balance it as well. But if a student who didn't perform well had the early intervention, where would they be in their trajectory? So that's sort of that missing piece, and so trying to put your arms around all of the research that's out there is really a challenge.
He just wants to clarify something.
I think one thing to, Michael, to respond to that makes it hard is we don't have right now a full day curriculum in place. it's really a half-day curriculum with extension. So we actually probably wouldn't anticipate, based on the curriculum that we designed currently, that there would be a performance difference for students.
It is a half-day curriculum, whether it's a full day or half-day, which we've been doing now for 20 years.
I just wanted to say that I don't think that we should determine the impact of universal all-day based on MCAS scores. I don't think that the fact that we don't have lower MCAS scores means anything with respect to evaluating whether to have all-day kindergarten. I think as a former sociology major and somebody who's done a whole lot writing on this, I think the science has been clear for decades. And I think that we should really, as a society, if we had universal access to high-quality, all-day pre-kindergarten, it's been shown to have huge benefits for kids. And so I don't think we should be evaluating whether these students perform at higher levels into college. I mean, that's really, you're just missing the entire, forest when you're talking like that about all-day kindergarten. That's not what it's about. So I just want to say that.
I am more concerned as we saw the survey data from the last time, so I'm also still concerned the percentage of because I remember there's quite a few percentage of families that they're very fond of the half day, so that's the one thing. The other thing I agree with Adam, which is the readiness. And I'm more looking from, because we want to provide meaningful education and we want to get ourselves ready in terms of curriculum, also from the staff perspective. So that's kind of my current, whether we are ready for this.
I actually spent some time going further through all the responses of the teachers and the families that we had. And I think it is fair to say it is absolutely overwhelming that teachers feel that they could not all of them, but I think they're overwhelmingly in support of it. I'm fine with having an opt-out. I think it's also pretty overwhelming evidence that families who are economically challenged are not going to all-day K. I mean, there's teachers who said, all of my half-day K kids live in apartments. A lot of them in the hybrid classes ask to stay. They don't want to go home. So if you read through, it's a lot of information, it's lengthy, and it takes some time to get through. But if you read through there, I don't see huge concerns. I think if we had an opt-out provision for families who truly didn't want to do it, I think you also have to look at the fact that it's probably uncomfortable answering those questions by saying that you're not accessing all-day kindergarten because of budgetary issues, because that would feel pretty crummy as a parent. So there may be also some underreporting of that information that I find overwhelmingly supports the move to all-day kindergarten, which we are one of the very few districts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that still does not have.
We do have several more slides.
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't we do the budget pieces still?
Okay, so why consider tuition-free all-day kindergarten? And some of this is in line with what Ginny was just saying. It would certainly provide more time in school for socialization, play-based learning, communication skills, literacy, and math learning and practice. AV parents are requesting it. We know that 80% of families enrolling, even with a $4,500 tuition, sign up for all-day kindergarten. When we polled the half-day parents and we asked the half-day parents if it were free, would you prefer all-day or half-day? That number goes up to 92%. So 8% of our parents said they would still prefer half-day if it were free. Again, 87% of Massachusetts school districts have tuition-free all-day kindergarten. 95% of Massachusetts students are attending all-day kindergarten because there are districts like us that have both. And then the teacher feedback was really very powerful. Students have greater social skills and stamina when they reach first grade, and most of the teachers prefer to go to tuition-free all-day kindergarten as soon as possible. All right, so this is the budget for all-day K. Today I added a couple more slides. Yesterday we met with Steve Ballard, who provided us with some feedback and some questions about the budget. So I tried to incorporate some of it into this. So these numbers are almost exactly what we saw before, but I have a breakdown on the next couple of slides. These are up-to-date numbers. They are actuals as of right now in terms of revenue and in terms of expenses and salaries. One thing to remember is we created a budget this time last year. Then in March, we decided to go to full hybrids. So we have hybrids in every school. That increased revenue and it increased salaries because we moved all the teachers except for one of them from half day to all day. So the bottom line didn't change a lot, but this is reflective of the bottom line. So at this point in the year, we're projecting our revenue from all-day kindergarten to be $1,008,000. Okay? What?
Our package,
This got changed today. So I pulled, yeah, so what did the packet say, 972, something like that?
991.
991, so it's very close. But this is just our projection as of right now. And these numbers change all the time, so one thing about going back and forth is what was going on at that point in time. So as of right now, that number's a little bit higher than it was in your packet. It's $1,008,000. The total projected expense is $1,080,316. I think that's the same as what was in your packet, because the salaries, we knew what they were at the beginning of the year. So what's in your packet was as of September, maybe October, but I think September. And then this is as of literally today. So with that, we're projecting a $72,000 loss in the revolving account, which is okay because the revolving account started this year with $346,000. So now we're projecting it's going to end at $273,000. It should say June 2020. Okay, so far so good? So to help sort of clarify how we got to those numbers, I made 3 columns. So this slide was not in your packet. Did it get reposted?
Not yet,
Oh, okay. So when we met with Steve, we were looking at a document that he had gotten from the public records request that had this first column. This is the budget we proposed a year ago, which assumed a half-day kindergarten in every school. This was before we decided to go to hybrids. So at that time, we said salaries were going to cost $788,000. That was with a half-day in every school. Once we decided to go to all hybrids, and we have one remaining half-day, the salaries we're actually paying for this year are $939,000, $940,000. So does that make sense? So there's about $150,000 additional spending in salaries, and we knew that. The supplies went up a little bit because we have more all-day kindergartens. The admin costs stayed the same, the health costs stayed the same, the software stayed the same. So the total expenses went from $920,000 to $1,080,000. The revenue went from $940,000 to $1,008,000. And so, whereas a year ago, we tried to give you a budget that was close to zero, we had a $19,000 profit. At this point in time, we're projecting a $72,000 loss to the fund balance, which will leave it at $273,000. With this, I project out next year. So this is where we are projecting next year. This is sort of if all things are equal. If the hybrids stay the way they are and we keep one half-day kindergarten, the salaries would be $976,000. Everything else stays the same. Total expenses, $1.1 million. The revenues, I'm going to project stay relatively where they are right now. That can fluctuate a little bit with enrollment, with scholarships. So if it were to stay the same, $1,008,000, we would actually use up $111,000 of the fund balance, and the fund balance would go down to $161,000.
I just have a quick question on the revenues.
Yep.
That assumes that there's no change in the tuition cost from this year to next year.
So part of what we're proposing is that we take $180,000 out of E&D to pay for a decrease in revenue. And that decrease in revenue is going to be about $157,000. Okay? So it's close to a wash. We'd lose a little bit less than this, $111,000. So if we decrease tuition by $750, take $180 out of E&D, we're not adding to the budget, then we end up relatively here. Good question. Okay? So, how much is it going to cost to move to tuition-free all-day kindergarten? So the expenses from the previous page, $1.1 million, exactly what you saw on the previous page. So I went and looked. We have one more half-day class if we move that. So this is if all-day K became tuition-free in FY21, how much would it cost? Move one more half-day K to all-day K, that's $48,000 salary increase. There is savings in transportation. We're estimating it to be $80,000. Transportation is reimbursed. I put 72%, it's somewhere in there.
It's higher, but then there's an eligibility factor too that you have to raise.
Oh, so the point is that in the first year, we would save about $80,000 in transportation for midday transportation. But then when that gets back to the state, there's a one-year lag, then our expenses for transportation having been reduced by $80,000, our reimbursement would be reduced by $50,000 or $60,000. Okay? But I put that in as a savings. I said right now we're spending $28,000 on supplies. We would probably spend less because it's not all from tuition. With the tuition, we do extra field trips and some extra things. So I reduced the supplies budget by $10,000. And so all in FY21, the total cost if we went to free all-day kindergarten would be $1,078,000. So everything I had presented before talked about it costing $1 million. I'm still talking about it costing $1 million. Each year out, the salaries are going to go up a bit, and as long as the tuition doesn't go up, which we're not planning for it to go up, that number will increase to some degree. Okay? All right, so moving to all day is estimated to cost $1 million. We should consider possible phasing of funding. Two possible methods: reduce the tuition over 3 or 4 years and/or supplement with E&D reserves. If we went to full implementation, it would add roughly 1% to the budget. The Student Opportunity Act, you've heard about it. It's kind of a wild card that we hope to know more about in the next couple months, but not early enough to sort of affect what we're going to do for this year. All right, so there are all these funding models. I didn't put them back in last time. I had a request to put them back in so that we're showing multiple models. They're very complicated, and it's hard to sort of get the numbers right when they keep moving. So, but they're in here. I want to concentrate on sort of the two extremes of going sort of gradually or going all in. Steve Ballard sent us a whole bunch of stuff just before the meeting. I was feverishly trying to look at it earlier in the meeting. He makes a case that the reduced revenue shouldn't be $240,000 a year. If you go down $1,000, it should be $210,000. I agree with that because we have tuition families, they don't all pay. I just put in the number if everybody was paying. The additional expenses, we can take out that $120,000 because we have a little up for salaries, we have down for transportation, it's kind of a wash. So these numbers can shift a little bit. What it ends up doing in the long run is bringing it in 1 year sooner. So you save about $200,000 at the end of the process. But the big picture, you could reduce tuition by $1,000 a year, and in 4 or 5 years, if you were to increase $150,000 to $200,000 in the budget per year and supplement the rest with E&D, you would get there in 4 years or so. A second option would be to cut it in half in the first year and go free in the second year. Again, we can take out the $120,000 increased expense. The use of E&D over on the right, those numbers are too high. They should, where it says 740, it should be 540. And all those numbers go down by a couple $100,000. But again, it brings it in, it affects 25 and 26. It doesn't affect 21 through 24. So I don't want to sort of belabor these. To go all in, the reduced revenue is about $1 million without the increased expenses. Again, you've got to get to $1 million budget increase over however many years you can tolerate the increase in the budget. So the process means bring the budget up 1%, whether you want to do that in 1 year or 3 or 4 years. Those are kind of your options. So this recommendation is what we said at the last meeting, and we're still, after being much further along on the budget with the recommendations Peter made earlier, we're still recommending that for FY21 we go from $4,500 to $3,750, and we take $180,000 out of E&D to cover the reduction in the revenue. The second year, you could reduce it from $3,750 to $3,000, and then you certainly would have a lot more information about SOA and kind of when that's going to kick in, and you could decide. Dave would say that you want to go to free all-day kindergarten the year before SOA kicks in, meaning us getting out of hold harmless, so that you can fully capture the additional revenue you would get, because you're now, you've added 150 or so kids to our foundation enrollment. So this shows that process, taking 180. Whenever you take 180 out of E&D, you then need to add it to the budget the next year to be back to even where you started. So then if you're stepping it down, you take out the next 180 and so on. And in the end, your numbers have to add up to $1 million. And then, so these next two slides, I'm going to go a little bit slower. So there are you have a few options here. We do need you to vote this evening so we can tell parents what to expect. So option A, you could set the tuition at $3,750, and then we would take 180 out of E&D. It's a 0.2 budget increase, but because we took it out of E&D, it does not increase the assessment. You could then plan to, option B, go to $3,750, make a final decision on tuition-free all-day kindergarten next year when you know more about SOA. So you could decide right now you're going to go to all-day kindergarten, or you could wait until you have SOA to have better information about it. You could keep the tuition at $4,500, or you could talk about going to total free all-day kindergarten and taking $1 million out of E&D to do it. On the next page, I have sort of the financial impact. And this is what Peter had in his memo with sort of one addition. So the first one is the one we're recommending, making tuition $37.50, offsetting that with $180K of E&D. At this point in time, given the recommendations Peter made earlier, that's a 3.18% budget increase for the district. The Acton assessment would be 3.26. The Boxborough assessment would be 1.41. We'd be using $180K out of E&D for all-day kindergarten. The total use of E&D in the budget with this model is $1 million, just under $1 million. We are estimating, and it's somewhat aggressive, that we're going to turn back $1 million, all right? So E&D is starting at 3.9%. If we use $1 million this year, we put $1 million back, we'll be at 3.9%. Your policy is to be in a range between 4% and 4.5%. So that's the recommended model. You could keep tuition at $4,500, not use E&D, so not use that 180, in which case the budget increase would be 2.98. The Acton assessment and the Boxborough assessment stay the same because it's just a reduction in E&D. You're not using any money from E&D for all-day kindergarten, and so then the total use of E&D would be $820K, which leaves us at 4.1. Is this making sense? So I'm trying to go kind of slowly. You could keep all-day kindergarten at $4,500 and still use the 180 to reduce the assessments. In that case, your budget increase is 2.98. The Acton assessment's 3.02. Boxborough assessment's 1.17. You're using a total of $1 million of E&D, ending at 3.9%. The fourth column was not in Peter's memo. This is if you wanted to go full implementation of free all-day kindergarten, offset by $1 million of E&D, your budget increase would be 4.06%. The Acton and Boxborough assessments don't change because it's all coming out of E&D, so 3.26 and 1.41. The use of E&D for all-day kindergarten is $1 million. The total use of E&D is $1.8 million, and that leaves E&D at 3%, or $2.8 million. So that's the financial impact of various options for you. So I think that's it. Of course.
The asterisk line at the bottom, just to say that, and we didn't rehearse this, but Marie said we estimate $1 million replenishment of E&D. Well, the word is assumed, and there's a nuanced difference. It's an assumption. We haven't projected, we haven't done an estimate. It's just an assumption based on historical trends that we replenish by $1 million. It's important to, I think, from my view, understand the difference between, well, Dave is projecting a turn back of $1 million versus we've done something, a chart, and for purposes of discussion, we're assuming that there'll be $1 million. And I think it's important to make sure you understand that.
So just correct me if I'm wrong in my thinking. So this only really works for me if there's a cost offset. So if in your memo, and I think you said it tonight, that the impact of adding full day K to the foundation enrollment would be about $1.7 million in FY20. Is that
1.37.
what?
1.37.
1.37. Okay. So what my concern is, I mean, and that doesn't help us if we're in full harm. So this is all depending on no drops in enrollment. Like to have this be a fully funded through the foundation enrollment, it would assume that we never have a drop in enrollment and get into hold harmless. Am
Yeah,
looking for
but-
stable funding sources.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, all right, so I wanted to just make that clear. Do you want to jump in? Because I have.
Can I just add, Diane, I'm sorry, so I'm sure you understand this, but, so that 1.7 million, so his estimate right now, if we have no drop in hold harmless, is still 3 years out or 4 years out, is that? And it's so hard to say this is our estimate, because we have no rolled up information yet, but it's certainly not in FY '21.
Okay. So that's important for me to know that there's a stable funding source, because I'm not just looking at the impact. I mean, we could handle a drop in tuition this year, but we're our close to our levy limit, and or at our levy limit in Acton. And we just essentially, the Acton taxpayers just took a 5% hit just from the bond for the to support the building project. So looking like far out, like this just, it doesn't make sense to me. So if we're going to drop enrollment, I mean, if we're going to drop the tuition by $750, to me, we could come back and reevaluate it every year, but to me, that says we're on the road to full decay at some point. So I would like a kind of a clearer path to it at this point from a budgetary perspective, because we can drop it, but then maybe like in 5 years, like we can, you know what I'm saying? As like, we're taking these other things on, like, building projects and other things, the financial consequences, tax consequences of that. So that's where my thinking is around the budgetary impact. But the other piece of me is keep saying equity, equity, equity. So what happens to kids on free and reduced lunch? What happens to special education kids who would benefit from inclusive settings if we don't do this? And that's, that's our first kind of allegiance is to doing what's in the best interest of everyone. And just set the curriculum piece aside, because I think that it also doesn't make sense to do this until we have a developed curriculum for all-day K. This feels really kind of just an urgency that doesn't maybe need to be so urgent until we have something like that makes sense in place for full-day K. Can you talk to the equity piece?
So I'll start, and then Deb and Dawn, if you have anything to add, please do. So last year, this was certainly an alarm for us around the equity piece, and I do think a lot of good work has happened in the last year and a lot in consultation with you all. So last year's half-day kindergarten class, 25% of the students were on free and reduced lunch. 10% of our general population, but 25% of our half-day K. So we were very uncomfortable with that. So we put a lot of things in place this year and over the end of last year to make sure that wasn't happening again. So in September, we had 9 students on free and reduced lunch in half-day K, and we've now moved 5 of them to full-day K with scholarship. So we're down to 4 or 5 kids in half-day K, and that's after really reaching out several times to see if we could move them to all-day. Having the hybrids does make moving from half-day to all-day easier. So when we had a half-day and 2 all-days in a school, you're not going to move kids in November, December, January from one class to another. But if you're in a hybrid, you can move. So some of that has happened with students with IEPs. Certainly kids with IEPs who have team meetings that determine that their program is best served in all-day kindergarten are placed in all-day kindergarten to begin with. We used to have some kids who would be in half-day K, afternoon resource program. Now we have kids in all-day kindergarten, and the resource program is also available to them. So students with IEPs whose team determines that this is the best program for them, they're placed in all-day K without tuition. We're looking at information about English learners. So I do think a lot of the equity issues are getting better, and it is a benefit of a hybrid, I think, that we can make those kind of moves as the needs become more well understood. I'm going to ask Dawn if she has.
When you have all of the different possible funding models of, going from FY '21 all the way up, does that assume consistent number of students enrollment? Because our enrollment's supposed to go up, right? So assuming that it does, and it follows the projections and whatever, it means that the cost to us would actually, so there's 17 sections of kindergarten right now, but there's 19 sections of 6th grade. So I don't know how quickly the projections look in terms of classrooms and how close we are, within those 17 classrooms when we go to higher grades and, all of that kind of stuff. I just wonder, we have a standard for how many kids we like to see in a kindergarten classroom, and, depending year to year, how many kids we have, maybe when you go to 18 classrooms, and so I assume that affects, how much, it could be a older teacher.
So that's exactly the answer. So yes, enrollment is projected to grow. If it grew much, we'd add a teacher and an assistant in the classroom, and so the revenue would offset the costs. So we could have more kids in all-day K because we have more kids, and if the percentages stay the same. But the cost would also grow by another classroom.
But that's the tuition. So if we went to universal all-day K, though, next year, whenever we did it, it's the numbers we were looking at are on the assumption that we have the same number of students we have now.
So I would consider the growth of a classroom separate from the kindergarten discussion, because if we have more kids, we have to add a classroom.
Sure, I was just curious.
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
Can we guarantee that any student that wants full-day K and can't afford it because they're on free and reduced lunch or other reasons that they will be able to do that?
That has been what we've always done.
Yep.
We have a sliding scale. We use the state's process to determine. Many of the people on scholarships are not full scholarships, so the scale determines sort of an affordability factor. So yes, we do that. We would always continue to do that. I have to say though, with that, there's a vast middle group who might really want it, but paying $4,500 is too much of a stretch for a particular family, and free and reduced lunch is a bar that's quite low for Acton and Foxborough families.
I move that we set tuition for all-day K for FY '21 at $4,500.
Does anyone so he's moving that we set the tuition next year at no reduction, at what it is now.
Option C.
Sure.
She's going to be options. Well, just to be clear, the options have a lot of different language, and I think for the simplicity of discussion, it makes sense to simply move a tuition rate, and so I have moved the rate of $4,500 next year.
So option C is what he's suggesting. So he's moving that, so.
Is there a second? Was there a second?
Second.
Your second? Your second.
Yeah, Jason.
Okay, so do we want to have discussion on that then?
Can I ask another question? Can you tell me again the timeline when we'll have more definitive information about SOA?
The governor's budget's out the Wednesday before Budget Saturday. That's when it typically comes out. There could be definitive guidance before then. I haven't seen it. Ginny's not going to bet that at a minimum, and I'm assuming, and at that point, I'm hoping that there's guidance as to the full-scale implementation, but I'm mixing scenarios here, but back in 1993, when they initiated ed reform, it was supposed to be a 7-year phase-in. 7 turned into 9 or 10. Plus, when over effort was finally done away with. So it's always subject to appropriation, but there will at least be guidance that says this is what the state's expecting in January.
I'm going to ask Dave a question, if that's okay. We'll have the numbers budget, which will show sort of FY21, Chapter 70 by community. Isn't it possible we're not going to have a lot more information about what's going to happen to Acton, Foxborough?
What I'm waiting for is the spreadsheets that Desi puts out and the rates that are in the foundation budget calculation, and just see how those rates, they'll probably have it in the narrative. The operative assumption is they're going to do 1/7 a year for 7 years, but we don't know. And then there are other variables in addition that are going to make what our hold harmless level drops to or rises to. I'll be able to explain it at that point.
Can you go forward one slide to the chart again? So when I look at this, and I look at this last option here of implementing it with immediately and using E&D to do that, what this chart doesn't show is that in year 2, that money has to come from somewhere. And most likely it will come from our budget because we wouldn't be in line with our sort of spirit of our policy around E&D usage. So this leads me to believe that we understand that we can't implement this immediately from both the curriculum standpoint and from the financial standpoint. We have to start to make steps. We have to voice our commitment to the importance of this program and understand that we need to begin to make steps both on the planning side curriculum and on planning financially. So for me, it's a wise choice to begin to reduce the tuition, to be able to come back and look at this regularly and understand when can we deliver the curriculum, and when we get to that point that we don't have this $1 million nut that we have to pay off in year 2. So, for that reason, I'm not going to vote in favor of John's motion, because I believe that we need to make a statement today that we're going to make this transition, and that even though we will not begin to deliver a full-day curriculum to our students next year, that we are going to be moving in that direction.
I wholeheartedly agree with Adam. There is no effect on the Acton or the Foxborough assessment if we reduce it. It is a gesture that we are looking at this for the future, even if our hands are tied. Even if our hands are tied for more than 1 year, and I think that's an important gesture to make. I'm curious to know, John, if you ever want to have all day K tuition free or not.
I think that at the point in time that the state would provide a significant percentage of the funding, I would be in favor of having all-day K. I think it's a question of, do I see a good educational value in Acton and Foxborough on their own investing $1 million in this? My answer is no. And I would also note that even at the $4,500 level, there is a projected loss in the revolving account of a little bit north of $100,000. So we're not increasing tuition in response to inflation. We're ignoring that, but there is inflation. And we know we're taking a loss of $100,000. So this isn't as much a non-step as you might think it is.
If I can just say that in response to the social science, which shows the clear benefit to children, the state was for many years giving grants out to school districts to assist in the transition, recognizing the budget they would take. This district did not take advantage of that. Those state grants have been phased out.
Yeah, so this is really tough for me. Sorry, I had something to say and then I just, okay. So I could not in good conscience go before the town and say, we thank you for the building project, but now we're also going to make all-day K free. I don't think that that's it doesn't send the right message. I do think that moving towards the reducing to 3,750 is a positive step forward. And then there's still a part of me that says, what if we kept it the same and took that 180,000 out of ED anyway and reduced the assessment? Because again, we just asked the towns for a hell of a lot of money. So that doesn't answer, I'm not telling you where I am because I'm throwing out, this is just where my thoughts are.
So I struggle with this too, because, and I do try to keep up with reading the literature, and when I do, I get conflicting information. For example, there was literature that was shared with us last year that said that we really shouldn't be implementing full-day kindergarten at ages younger than 6 years old. But there's more research that I just received recently that says 5 years old is fine. There's a lot of research out there, but it's to me, it's not all that compelling. I'm hearing that there is social emotional, impact, but I'm reading these meta studies that show that the performance disappears in a couple of years. What I worry about are the kids who might benefit by not being away from home and having a chance to come home, and that's more of a comfort zone for them. I don't want to make it more difficult for those kids. And I'm also concerned about the summary that Deb shared, that there was evidence of a decrease in positive attitude towards school. And we haven't talked about that, and that concerns me greatly. I think I'd rather have kids, jumping up out of their beds and saying, I get to go to school today, than to know that there's some kids who are going to be in tears. There's a couple other things when I look over holistically on the budget. My concern is we're going to be going to get bonds, and it's important that we have that Moody's rating to get a favorable rate. What that full implementation and using E&D and then considering the second year, I have a feeling Moody's would look at that and say, what are you doing? So that would penalize us, not just for the budget, but for other projects in the future. So I'm still struggling with this.
I think what you just said probably resonates a lot with how I'm thinking about all-day K, and I was really interested in seeing what the schedule could look like and what the curriculum could look like, and I still have a lot of questions about that. I've had both experiences in my own family with my own children of an all-day K experience when there was no half-day option being an incredibly negative experience that was really stressful for a lot of the students in the classroom that I saw. And so I'm pleased to see what the schedule could look like, but I still have a lot of questions about it, what the length of the day and the added curriculum would look like for 5-year-olds throughout the year. I'm just not 100% sure that is always a positive. I think it often is a positive, but not always. And so then when there's such a large price tag attached to it as well, then not feeling so certain about what a positive it could be makes it harder to justify the expense in this year when there's so much information looming in the near future that we just don't have yet. It's tough timing, I think, to try to make the decision.
I just have a quick question for Dave. If we look at all the columns here, so only the column 2, that ending the END balance funding above the policy, what the policy sets, right? Because the policy sets between 4 and 4.5, right? So that basically means that, if we, let's say, if we reduce the tuition to $3,750, then that will be ending with 3.9%, and then we have to bump some money into that END in order to maintain what the policy requires, right? Or we have to modify the policy.
The policy is a target, it's not a legal mandate, but you did spend a lot of time last year determining what you thought the target should be, so obviously. If it's important to you to follow the policy, then you'll make decisions in a certain manner. If there's a greater good, so to speak, then the target's a target, you didn't hit the target.
Can I have one follow-up? Yes. Then I'm curious about why you want to list, those number 1 column, number 3 column, number 4 column. Obviously we cannot meet that, the policy target for the END balance.
The numbers that you see there, 3.9, 3.9, 4.1, whatever, that assumes that you use the amount shown there in total for E&D for the FY21 budget, and we return the net of $1 million through revenues over budget and expenditures under budget. If those two things are better than $1 million, then those E&D amounts will be higher, and the percentages will be higher. If it's less than $1 million, and I believe $1 million is a reach, then those numbers will be lower than they're shown. That's, again, the assumption is that we turn back a net of $1 million in revenues and expenses this year.
So to me, I want to agree with a lot of what Amy said, and we need to do this in a financially responsible manner. And I agree with what Adam said. I think to me the most important thing is to showing our commitment to moving to universal all-day kindergarten. I would encourage Paul and Nora, if you haven't gone back and looked at what our teachers say in our district about our students, their observations after teaching full or half-day kindergarten for some of them a couple of decades, and the changes in the populations and the impacts that they see for kids who are English language learners, who have special needs, who have with the explosion of anxiety and other disorders. So I have one half-day and one all-day kindergartner in my house, but I try not to make my decisions based on that very small sample size. I think that, to me, the most important thing is to show our commitment to moving towards equity and respecting the huge generosity of our communities who have supported our school building, which is also a move towards equity, and not veering so far out of our lane that we wear out our welcome in those communities. So I would like to, I feel more strongly about moving towards making the commitment than the actual level. And I appreciate any and all efforts to assist families who are economically disadvantaged, whether they need the free and reduced income lunch that we can.
Yeah, so I just want to say that I've read a lot of studies about the importance of Head Start and other early intervention programs for young children, and I'm fully supportive of that. When I read the teacher feedback, I didn't find it as clear cut. I think, as you did, Jenny, I think that there were a lot of concerns with the hybrid program and the impact of that on students that was kind of confusing and kind of confounded the findings. And then also, when we're looking at such a small number of students, to say that students in all-day kindergarten were more ready than students in half-day kindergarten, the problem is there's an effect of which kids were placed into which program that you just can't really take out. Some children who maybe aren't as ready for all-day kindergarten were put in half-day kindergarten, and then in turn So I didn't find it as clear cut. I think some teachers seemed for it, some teachers seemed ambivalent, and some teachers were pretty strongly against not having a half-day option, and protecting 5-year-olds from what can be a stressful day. But I think they can be done well, and I trust that our district will do it well when we do it, and I think that we will move toward that. I think that that will happen, and I'll support it when it happens. But I like the idea of doing it the right way, so that the schedule doesn't become a negative for the students, but instead it builds in age-appropriate play and choice and student record learning and those sorts of things that you like to see in kindergarten rather than a different curriculum. So doing it in a thoughtful way.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor that has a second. Which does not mean that has to be the final vote that we make on this. So John has made a motion to set the tuition at $4,500. Did your motion include using the E&D or no?
No, intentionally, I simply made the motion as to what we were going to do
With all that. Okay, so John's motion is to set the tuition at $4,500 and Angie seconded it. So all those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
So John, Michael, and Angie, correct? All those, yep. All those against, say nay.
Nay.
Any abstentions? Okay, so everyone else voted no.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move to set the tuition at $3,750 for FY21 with a commitment to implement full all-day K in the coming years, following more guidance regarding the implementation of the student opportunity.
Second. Can I amend that?
Sure.
To add that we would use $180,000 of E&D to pay for it?
Do you accept that amendment? Okay.
I'll second that.
Is there discussion on that? Yes, Angie, you have a question.
So is that a commitment, or is that every year we're going to come back to visit? Because there's concern on the enrollment numbers.
Yeah, I was particular in my wording to say that we're committing to moving forward to full all-day K, but we would not make a commitment as to the time we would do that, because we are waiting for plenty of information from the state in terms of the financial implication. But I think it's important for us to say in this vote that in addition to the setting the tuition, we are committing to moving forward with free all-day K.
Michael?
So can we go back to the previous slide, that those options? Because I try to understand what your motion, what the option you were, the option name?
A.
No, it's B.
Oh, wait.
He worded it differently.
I worded it differently. It's a hybrid of A and B. So
Okay.
it's primarily option A, but instead of,
Without
without committing to 3 to 4 years, because we don't have enough information, I feel, right now.
So I don't think you clearly, use your options, the word your option, because, that right now is I'm confused by your motion, because, you're kind of between the A and B, and I want to know exactly what's your word. So, because if we go back to look at the B,
I wrote it down.
and then the B is that, we will set the tuition this year.
So I'll reread the motion that I made, which was a motion to set the tuition at $3,750 for FY21 with a commitment to implement full all-day K in the coming years, following more guidance regarding the implementation of the Student Opportunity Act. And then it was further amended by Amy to make use of $180,000 of E&D to pay for it.
Do you understand, Michael? So essentially, he was taking, she's changing the slide. The only thing he took out of option A was that definitive 3 to 4 years. Because option A defined how long it would take us to fully implement all-day K. And he took that piece out. Yeah.
Can I make an amendment?
I think we should vote on that first. I think it gets too confusing otherwise for Beth to try to manage exactly what it is that
My concern is that, what I want is that we want to revisit this next year. So to decide, how many years, we need to finish this transition. And what will be the next year's tuition. The year after next year's tuition, so.
I think Adam was indicating that we would revisit it next year.
No, it didn't say here.
No.
We just say that we just vote to set this tuition with a commitment. And over the coming years, but we never say,
Right, we would revisit it with more information to set the tuition each year, rather than committing to reducing it every single, that was the spirit of his.
But still, over the coming years, when we just look at this option A, and then when we go back to that, table, and it just made me that, because we already said year over year what's the tuition. So if just if we don't put that, revisit that next year, then we might just ending up with going with the table.
So what is your specific recommendation that what wording would you want to add to that?
So I want to, I want to add, revisit next year to make a further decision whatsoever.
Wait. Are you saying that you want to say that we're saying 3750 for next year, and each year we'll redetermine the 3750? Or are you saying we'll come back and we'll talk about the whole question again?
The whole question.
Okay, that's fine.
So there's a reason why when I made my motion, I made it simply on the subject of tuition, because that is a binding action related to next year's budget. There certainly is a place for the school committee to make statements that might or might not bind the behavior of future school committees, but I would strongly suggest that we would be better served, and minutes would be better served by making a simple motion with respect to tuition. And then if people want to make a separate statement, to say that it's the consensus of the committee, whatever, related to futures, I think that's fine. But I would not suggest including the motion. And if that's not removed from the motion, I will vote for it, vote against it for that reason alone.
Move the question.
We're not a town meeting.
Robert, it's a fair thing to do.
That's a fair thing to do. Okay, I just want to clarify where we are. So, Michael, I just want to understand. Michael is okay with what Adam said, but you wanted to specifically say we will revisit this topic, or, next year?
But he's saying yes to it.
He's saying yes to it, but he's saying he wants to
After we get the information.
to revisit the tuition.
No, just the topic, the whole topic.
The whole topic.
I was revisit the decision to implement.
Okay.
So,
You mean you want to revisit the decision to implement it at all next year?
Well, yes, because I want to know more, I want to, we make the decision after knowing more about SOA, and then we can make the full decision, the final decision.
But isn't that what Adam said?
But actually, it's more close to the option B.
So I think that we should, you can ask a question for a second, but I think that we should vote on the motion that Adam and Amy then amended, unless you have a question about it, Paul.
I do. The question is, don't we revisit the tuition every year?
The tuition.
I mean, I would think that we would revisit anything that was a piece of the budget, yes. Okay, so Adam's motion, friendly amendment by Amy to say that we would add, that we would use E&D to pay for this tuition reduction. All those in favor of that motion? Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
So that's 3. John, Michael, and Angie. Any abstentions? Okay, so that passes. I believe, even with the waiting.
Yes, it does.
Beth,
Of the
did we do
votes.
that right?
It's 15 and a half to
There was an
6.
amendment, but do we
Okay.
have to vote?
Thank you, Brie, for doing a very quick math.
You want to get rid of the amendment, and come back to the original motion and do it, but
Yeah.
I don't think we need to go back through that process.
Okay, so we did, that's what I thought.
I think we're done.
So the motion passed.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion, that's what I said, motion passes.
Okay.
Marie did the math first.
I did 15 and a half to 6.
Workstation.
Yeah, I was going to say all of that, too. Thank you.
All
Okay.
right.
All right, let's move on to item 4.1. We have minutes in our packet from 11:21, and next, the minutes from last meeting will be at our next meeting. So the minutes in your packet are from November 21st. Now,
To approve. Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, those pass unanimously. School building committee.
In case you missed it, big news is the building project did pass, so we're proceeding with the project. In other building project news though, last Monday, or this past Monday, I guess, it's been a long week, we spent the day interviewing construction management firms. The subcommittee of the building committee that did the interviews unanimously recommended the top choice was Consigli. The building committee approved that selection last night at its meeting, and so tomorrow we will begin negotiations with Consigli for the construction management fees for that project. So we're actually hoping to have them on board right as of the first of this year and proceed with that project. So we are awaiting the project scope and budget agreement from MSBA. We got word from new staff, we should expect that within the next few business days. That will likely also probably be just after the new year, but we are ready to roll with the next steps on this project, and it's exciting. We will spend the spring working with the construction management team along with Arrow Street and Skanska to complete the design of the project. We have an early package of work that is slated to go out beginning just after students leave for the summer, and that includes some septic and early site work, beginning to do foundations. During the process, we'll also complete our construction documents, and based on the schedule we have right now, we anticipate seeing steel go up probably late next fall and throughout the winter next year. So pretty aggressive construction timeline, but we will start seeing that building taking shape by this time next year.
Excellent. All right, item 4.3.1, policy. So we have a first read of the public participation policy and a second read and potential vote on the tutoring for pay policy. And of course, I won't use this, but I can you always sit on this side of the table.
I know.
That's messing up.
Thanks, okay, so the policy subcommittee met this morning. There are two policies for you to review tonight. The first one, if you take a look at it, it's the first read on the public participation at school committee meetings. A couple of key changes. One was that there seemed to be a consensus to change the time allotted to each speaker from 2 minutes to 3 minutes. So that is in the packet, that's in the policy. But also keeping in mind that it does say that the chairperson shall determine the length of public participation for the whole public participation segment. And that was just in there in case it turns out to be a night where there are a lot of speakers and it becomes repetitious, and it just gives the chair the ability to kind of say, well, I think we should, I think we've heard everybody's opinion. If you don't have anything else to say, then anything you need to say. And the second piece comes from the ruling out of the Natick case. And it's number 5, and it came directly from our attorney. So this is a first read. If you have any comments, please send them to me or by the full subcommittee by Friday, January the 3rd, so that we can do a second read vote at our next meeting on the 9th. And the second policy is a second read, and that's the tutoring for pay. We did get some feedback from a school committee member who was concerned that we were telling teachers that they would not be allowed to recommend tutoring for their students. So what we did is we took a look at it and had a conversation and decided that really the spirit of that was that we didn't want teachers recommending tutoring, a tutor for pay for equity issues and just to we didn't want to put an undue burden on families where they need to go out and hire somebody to do their tutoring. So we changed the policy to say, and it should be highlighted on in your policy. At ABRSD, teachers regularly provide extra help to their students. Drop-in centers staffed by teachers are available free of charge to students in grades 7 through 12, and that should be beginning in February. Teachers may recommend these and other supports to students and families. However, to avoid putting an undue financial burden on families, teachers will not recommend private paid tutoring services. So that's the change there. And I guess we could take questions, otherwise we're looking for a vote tonight.
So I'm actually going to recuse myself from running the vote of this. It's a conflict of interest, so we can go ahead and do questions and all that, but Adam's going to.
A question on the public participation, actually. So is that only for the 2 minutes at the beginning, or because sometimes we talk about this like kindergarten, if there are people who want to participate, is that also?
My understanding is that the public comment, whether it's within a meeting or at the beginning of a meeting, was limited to 2 minutes. If this passes, then it will be 3 minutes.
So that also include the in-meeting?
That's how we have functioned. That's how we have always functioned.
Because the reason I asked the question, because there are parents ask, they want to come up, but that question is related to a specific topic that we're talking about, but they're not sure when to drop in, when to participate.
So maybe that's a point that we should clarify better in the policy about when you can ask questions that are not. So the beginning is specifically for things related that are things not on the agenda, not on that evening's agenda. But we've also taken comments about things later on the agenda at the very beginning of the meeting. So we should kind of clarify that, I think, with policy, with this, the policy.
I just wanted to comment that it's nice that we do include the reference to email here. So even when people are going to comment, I think it's very helpful if people do send an email to the shell to provide some background of what their interest is. I would, encourage people to do that because I think ultimately it's more impactful.
So on the public participation, I like that we're moving to 3 minutes. The 2 minutes just went by really quick, and sometimes I think members of the public were thinking that we were being rude. But what I also noticed is that when you're up at the podium and speaking, that time goes by so quickly that they don't even realize that it's passing. So giving them a little bit more time, I think, is good.
Any other comments or motion on the policy bill?
I wanted to recuse myself also from this vote due to potential conflict of interest.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that passes, thank you.
Okay.
All right, Diane, did you want to update us on budget?
budget met this morning, we also met last week. We spent the bulk of we spent all the time actually reviewing the cuts that we potentially we're going to make and that we are definitely going to make to lower our assessment. So I'm actually really pleased with the discussions around the budget that happened around this table today. You know, in budget sub, it's a really interesting subcommittee to be on, and my hope and wish really was that those kinds of conversations can take place in a larger context among the 11 of us, and that happened tonight, and it was really nice to see that. So thank you for your contributions.
Adam, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick update on the capital improvement planning subcommittee. So we met on December 11th. Obviously, we reviewed the status of the current ongoing projects. And we've also begun to discuss the changing role of the committee. As we were originally charged last year, it was really around creating the capital improvement plan, which is now in place and being implemented. So some of the things that we'll be looking to do, and we'll come back to this larger body with a proposal around, is how we can provide more transparency around the life cycle of a capital project, from how one gets proposed and implemented, and then how it gets completed and closed out. So you'll see some more updates from this subcommittee, most likely the following budget season this year.
Who's giving the ALG update?
ALG met on December 13th. It was right after town meeting, and so we were looking at the spreadsheet and talking about what the impact is on the budget for the town and the school. There is a deficit, and they had us in at 3.98 that we were originally at. Anyway, you know, the spreadsheet has to be updated, but the budget. So I wanted to just let everybody know that the town budget workshop, it's kind of like our budget Saturday, is taking on January 8th. So if you're interested in watching that, you're certainly invited to do so.
Can I just make one comment on that? I think one of the big things with the ALG spreadsheet that we had looked at was there, even with the budget that we had proposed and what the town had proposed, there was about a $900,000 delta between expected revenues and expenses that still needed to get closed. So that was a lot of the work that we had done on the budget in the interim to be able to get down to the 3.26% to Acton. And, you know, so that will likely close probably to the tune of 400 and 450, somewhere between those numbers of that $900,000 delta. So we, you know, the work we did with this group in budget sub was able to close probably about half of that overall delta at ALG. So that was a good start.
Item 4.5 is a consent agenda with two.
Does everybody want to report on that?
Thanks, Bob.
My pleasure.
All right, so the OPEB Board of Advisors or trustees, I don't remember what we decided that we were today, met with our with those that manage our trust, right? Is that who we met with, Dave? Yes, Dave?
Would you like to?
Yeah, Dave, would you like to report on the OPEB?
I have been working on a presentation that I intend to make at a future school committee meeting in the near future.
Great, thank you.
Right. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Next time I'll send you a poem, okay?
About OPEB.
All right, item 4.5 is the consent agenda with to approve some donations, one of which is an incredibly generous award donation from the Massachusetts Science and Engineering Fair and Sanofi Genzyme Award to the Acton-Boxborough Regional High School Science Department. I believe that is because we had a student who performed quite well and won the science competition. I need a motion to.
Move to approve with gratitude.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. The warrants. I sheet that says Tessa underlined, because Dave always gives it to me like that. There are 7 warrants on the agenda now being circulated. Vendor warrants 20-012 in the amount of $451,918.05. 20-013 in the amount of $402,000 for $432,032.26. 20-013 PR in the amount of $1,055,464.79. Student Activity Fund warrants 20-012 SH in the amount of $10,806.28. 20-013 SH in the amount of $25,740. 20-013 JH in the amount of $13,960.51, and payroll warrant P2013 in the amount of $2,579,338.82.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?